Why are they making Godzilla pink? They're not making Godzilla trans or whatever the hell conservatives on YouTube think is happening.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
So a funny thing happened about 3 months and 1 week ago when I put together a brief rant about how the Monsterverse has failed. Mostly unscripted and out of a pure frustration for how needlessly dumb and hilariously boneheaded the Monarch TV show was.
He was huge! He appeared out of nowhere, and then he disappeared, guess what? Into nowhere, so consider yourself briefed.
Consider yourself suspended.
And yeah, out of a slowly building frustration that began around Godzilla King of the Monsters, and has now peaked with the release of Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Back when I made that video, I wasn't aware that it would kick off 3 months of Monsterverse fans, or as I like to call them, Monster Bros, basically attacking me all day from all fronts. I mean, they even found my cell phone number and spent weeks letting me know how they felt. Which, I mean, just put that in the comments. I prefer comments over this. And yeah, they seem to do all this with very little interest in actually watching my video or hearing what I had to say. Far be it from me to expect more from a group of people that are constantly telling me to turn my brain off to watch something, to not expect them to, turn their brain on to watch something. And these Monster Bros not watching the video are pretty obvious when 100 of their comments are about how I'm part of some evil syndicate of Godzilla -1 fans who mean to stomp out the fun of the Monsterverse and make all the children across the world cry. But yeah, as I said in that video, I hadn't even seen -1 yet, so anyone screaming in the comments about me being part of this exclusive club clearly didn't watch the video. I mean, the most that I could say is before I saw -1, I was still a fan of good movies, so I guess I was already predestined to be an enemy of the Monsterverse.
Pow!
Also apparently ignorant were all the Monster Bros attacking me for being upset that Godzilla was pink, which was yet another thing I never complained about in my video, and something I could give less of a shit about. Proof positive, my favorite on-screen Godzilla of the modern age is Shin Godzilla, and that boy was pink as hell, and was absolutely terrifying. So no, it's not about the pink, and I think it's pretty evident that anyone melting about that hadn't watched the video, but was instead just triggered as hell by the thumbnail. A trend of blind ignorance and unwillingness to engage with the material you're complaining about really hits its zenith when this person here decided to make a TikTok, which got like 1 million shares and views, way more than my video, calling me out over the thumbnail as some unhinged right-winger because I put Godzilla in a bra.
Why are they making Godzilla pink? They're not making Godzilla trans or whatever the hell conservatives on YouTube think is happening. It's a power-up. Godzilla is pink now because that's higher energy than light blue is, and so his lasers are stronger or something. That's probably the story reason.
Yes, I could explain that thumbnails are meant to be evocative, and the amount of people melting about this image is actually the exact reason that this video is still my second to top performing monetized piece of content. But I digress. The funniest part about all of this to me is that since I never even brought this pink nonsense up in the video, you basically have brave freedom fighters like this lady simply being triggered that I put Godzilla in a dress. Yeah, let me repeat that for those in the back. This lady is mad at me for putting ladies' clothes on something that shouldn't be wearing them.
It's a power-up.
You are made of stupid.
Before I start this review of Godzilla x Kong, to avoid months of goddamn lunatics jumping down my throat as they explain pink power levels to me in the comments for the 900th fucking time,
it's a power-up.
Let me get 3 things entirely clear before I start this review so I don't have to defend myself against Monster Bros all over again. Stay with me, please. Don't skip this part, because this is the stuff that you're going to complain about if you already hate me. Number 1. I do not want the Monsterverse to resemble Shin Godzilla or Godzilla -1. Those two films, while utter masterpieces, are not the only way to make Godzilla or kaiju films. The Gamera series did it perfectly. The first Pacific Rim did it perfectly. These are not movies that are deadly serious dramas. They're just good, semi-lighthearted, spectacle-filled kaiju movies. They're not dumb as rocks, they could appeal to all ages, and they're written well, and they're fucking awesome to look at. Furthermore, you guys really need to stop grouping together Shin Godzilla and -1. They're so tonally different and dramatically dissimilar from each other, it's basically night and day. All that Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1 prove is that you can make 2 extremely fantastic Godzilla films on the strength of good ideas, good writing, and a cinematically respectable execution. Number 2. When I say or said in my last video that the Monsterverse has failed, I'm not referring to money. 80 or more people actually thought it was a legitimately smart argument to say that because the Monsterverse movies made money, they haven't failed. Those are two mutually exclusive ideas, and whether something makes money does not even remotely define its quality. I said in the last video, and I'll say it again, the Monsterverse has failed because its original intent, created by amazing filmmakers like Gareth Edwards and Jordan Vogt Roberts, was abandoned, reshifted, and has resulted in a lesser serious, dumbed down, borderline embarrassing series of movies that are now only worthwhile for their monster fights, when clearly the series began as a way of taking kaiju cinema and bringing it in all of its splendor, glory, and terror to American audiences. Godzilla 2014 is a fantastic disaster movie with a lot to say about man's hubris and connection to nature. Kong Skull Island is a cracking homage to Vietnam-era cinema and is a comment on our obsession with destroying something before we actually come to understand it. Kong Skull Island in particular is a fantastic example of how a monster movie can be funny, it can have its own style, it can stay fairly light, yet be full of awesome action. Both of these movies you can speak thoughtfully on, you can draw observations from. They're not outright allegories, they're not dripping, sad dramas. And I can't be more serious when I say that you cannot do that kind of thing. You cannot draw those kinds of observations from Godzilla King of the Monsters or Godzilla vs. Kong. Those are movies where the toys come first and the ideas come later. And whether you like that or not, whether you want to cope endlessly about how just because the corny and endearing Showa era existed, that is somehow a legitimate excuse to make absolutely brainless movies in America some 60 years later, at the end of the day, it isn't how this series started. And in terms of films that can garner actual respect and or discourse, nothing in this series has stirred up an ounce of intellect or thought or real discussion outside of power levels and how Shimo's chains are actually vertebrae instead of chains. Yeah, nothing in this series has stirred up any of that since King of the Monsters. And finally, number 3, I love Adam Wingard. I love The Guest. I loved You're Next. I don't know what this man is doing to his career by making schlock this dumb, but please don't come into the comments assuming that I have it out for Wingard. In fact, I'm openly walking into this movie today, forgetting the sins of Godzilla v. Kong, and hoping that at best, Wingard can just finally go bonkers this time around. And at worst, he will be cementing for the second time in a row the Monsterverse as a goofy failure forever by dropping what I consider to be the third absolutely dreadful film in a row. I don't want that to be the outcome, and it's impossible for them to believe that I love the Monsterverse. And earmuffs, Monster Bros. I truly did love this series up until it shit its absolute pants. I was one of the few people in my circle and on my podcast and in my friend group going absolutely bonkers for Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Island. I still watch those movies regularly. I still hope for the return of a filmmaker who can add an entry to this series as impactful as those. But until then, I gotta be done defending myself. I've spent months being called every name in the book, watching my channel get ratioed early in its existence because of this, and overall just being exposed to one of the nastiest, least media literate, least mature, and most butthurt fan bases in the goddamn universe. So yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna set myself up again for this. I'm going to present my spoiler-free review of Godzilla x Kong, a film I'm not trying to dislike, in a series that I have loved every year of my life since I was 6 years old. I want nothing more than to see a kaiju film with solid writing, great action that is earned and awe-inspiring regardless of its tone. And I'm going into this, once again, with an open mind and an open heart, ready to accept the Monsterverse back into my life once more.
2 hours later.
So yeah, it was release day for Godzilla x Kong, and as such, I decided to take the advice of my fellow Monster Bros by doing my damnedest to turn my brain fully off for this one. I arrived at my local Regal Cinema on a gloomy day, pumped to the absolute eyeballs with the devil's lettuce, and ready to see a loosely cobbled together string of monster fights like I was playing Primal Rage for 2 hours. I didn't walk in expecting -1, hell, I didn't even walk in expecting Godzilla 2014. And somewhere in that shifting of expectation, in the acceptance of a lower quality product because that's the world we apparently live in, I ended up having quite a bit of fun with the new Empire.
Oh no!
It was the gooey, synthy, B-movie hootenanny that Godzilla vs. Kong felt like it desperately wanted to be. As a comparison point, it really feels like the progression from Godzilla v Kong to Godzilla x Kong is essentially similar to the progression from Batman v Superman to the Snyder Cut. Not in terms of these films' actual qualities, but because of how these films and their direct sequels seem to reflect their respective directors' descent into utter madness. Both Godzilla v Kong and Batman v Superman were utterly gutting film experiences that involved watching directors that I thought I could trust absolutely destroy the potential of the universe they had been so generously given. Both BVS and GVK took years of imagination, speculation, and expectation, and then threw those opportunities in the cinematic trash can. BVS and GVK also barely resemble their directors' signature styles, with BVS being suspiciously devoid of Snyder's aesthetically pleasing tableaus or signature slow-mo, instead replacing it with gray, sepia, shaky cam crap. Meanwhile, GVK, you could kind of feel, was just aching to have the humor, fun, color, and 80s throwback aesthetic that Wingard had become known for, with absolute classics like The Guest. Both of these films, I'm sure, if you argue it down to scene by scene, point by point, vaguely resemble their director's other work, but were mostly joyless, narratively broken, and pathetic excuses for what could have been the matchups of the century. I mean, come on, both of these films end up ignoring the titular fight altogether around the 2/3 mark in place for a showdown with a genetically engineered version of themselves made by an out-of-control rich man. And then we have these sequels to both of these utter disappointments, continuations to film series that are so utterly broken to begin with that it's hard to go anywhere but up. The Snyder Cut and the new Godzilla x Kong are both films that rise above their previous entries by including more of the style, imagination, and madness of their directors. Godzilla x Kong is clearly more of an Adam Wingard film than Godzilla v Kong, from its 80s-infused pulsating synth soundtrack, which I personally loved, to the inclusion of the star of his best film, 2014's The Guest, with the incredibly underrated Dan Stevens positively chewing up scenery in this one. Also present from The Guest is screenwriter Simon Barrett, who provides more of an outright adventure film this time around that feels more fun and less laborious than the last entry. Also, side note, really glad to be rid of Millie Bobby Brown. She sucks.
Hello everyone, it is Millie Bobby Brown on the movie Godzilla.
Who are you?
I don't know.
Both the Snyder Cut and Godzilla x Kong took the shattered remains of their former films and injected more of the style of their directors and more of everything else too. Like the Snyder Cut, Godzilla x Kong is stuffed to the absolute brim, irresponsibly so. It's a King Kong movie, a sci-fi action movie, a prehistoric adventure movie, a CGI cartoon about monkey politics in an alternate universe, a sequel to GVK, a slight reboot of the series for younger audiences, and an all-around mess, both narratively and dramatically. I think that the combination of GVK's success and Wingard's dedication to the Monsterverse has allowed Legendary to give him as close to free reign as a director can have in a situation like this. And like Snyder, it's a real for better or worse situation being handed that freedom. At least in this instance, Wingard has chosen to express this freedom by making some much-needed changes to the Monsterverse formula this time around. Wingard is done making excuses for the human elements of these movies, wisely shifting the majority of the film towards giant frozen dinosaurs and a version of Kong that is positively yoked. I mean, like, I literally don't remember him being this shredded. He looks kind of funny. Make no doubts, this is a movie with a grind-set, fresh and fit Kong with a pepper beard and ropes of muscles. This is a movie with a cute little Godzilla. I mean, I actually said, "Aww," when he did his little nappy time. Wingard also has done away with the scale and majesty of these kaiju. I mean, all of the creative framing work and added weight and heft to Godzilla that Gareth Edwards envisioned for this character in the universe are straight up gone. He's doing flips now all over the place. He's sprinting like a maniac. Kong has a baby Kong. He uses it as a fucking club at one point, swinging him around like a mace or something. I mean, I laughed a lot while watching this movie. Something that hasn't happened on purpose or by mistake in any entry in the Monsterverse thus far, so there's something to be said for that. Now you might be asking, DS, has the Monsterverse failed again? No, it hasn't. That's an event that happened past tense. We are still currently living in that failure, but I'm just choosing to enjoy the ride. I'm not going to be stupid enough to say that this movie has turned the series around in any way whatsoever. If anything, it's doubled down on its absolute worst tendencies and just decides to have fun with it. So, that's what I did too, Monster Bros. You'd be proud of me. I had fun with it. I laughed my ass off. I appreciated the focus on Rebecca Hall and Dan Stevens, who are both fantastic actors, but also spent most of the time just waiting for a giant monkey or lizard to show up. Wingard made this movie, this series, his own, and I just fundamentally disagree with this man's outlook on what the potential of these movies could be. Just as I'm sure Gareth Edwards watches a movie like this and wonders what the fuck happened to his series. So don't worry, Monster Bros, I'm not here to tear down your god again. I'm here to tell you something that may actually blow your mind a little bit, something that all 500 plus comments in my last video should listen to very closely. This is a sentence that Monster Bros are seemingly incapable of saying, of accepting, of believing. It is a sentence that Monster Bros will use any cope, any comparison to Showa, any clawing excuse to text or harass or slang me in the comments to avoid. Here we go. I'm gonna say it. Hi, I am DS Lyons of the Movie Blues, and even though it isn't how this series started, and even though it could be so much better and so much more regardless of its tone, and even though I'm fully aware that this is a bad movie, I had a ton of fun with Godzilla X Kong. See that, guys? Was that so difficult? To the people explaining scientific power levels, to the people saying that this is a direct homage to movies made 60 years ago in Japan, to people who say something is automatically successful just because people like it, to the people who say, but Toho approves of the Monsterverse. You can all stop struggling for air now. Look at me, I've stopped fighting too. I had fun with this movie, regardless of the fact that, like every entry since King of the Monsters, it's mostly a piece of shit. And that's okay, never said there isn't space for that. All I ever said is that if Godzilla has to have two completely separate tones, that they both can be still written and made well. Since that is a sentiment that seems to infuriate so many of you out there, you can have it your way. If you want your movies to be bad, keep bullying people online who love the same series as you, but want more from it. You know, and I'll level with you, sometimes I want more from the musicians that I love, from the restaurants that I frequent, from the TV shows that I stick with for years. Hell, sometimes I even want more from my local gym. I mean, they got rid of pizza night. I mean, what the hell is that? If you Monster Bros actually conducted your life like you've conducted your Godzilla gatekeeping rules, then I guess just go around loving everything because it's successful. Fast and Furious is Kino, McDonald's is the best restaurant. You desperately want to get a divorce because 1 in 2 people gets one, and that's popular. You want to have heart disease because it's the most popular form of death in the US. And other ideas and comparisons that make no sense. If you are truly a fan of something, it isn't about drinking it blindly. Act like you give other things you love that kind of carte blanche. As hard as it is to believe, here's another idea even more impossible for you bros. Critics aren't these agenda-based warmongers you always make us out to be. Now, I can only speak for myself because I'm sure there are bad critics out there that do nefarious things. But here I am after being attacked by you people for 3 months, freely admitting that I had a blast watching this stupid-ass movie. I laughed and clapped when Kong surfed on Godzilla's back into battle against a lanky monkey riding a frozen turtle. But I can be realistic about the things that I love, and even more realistic about the people who work to provide honest opinions about the things that they love too. Maybe if you Monster Bros had a little less blazingly obvious insecurity about the movie series you love, you wouldn't be caught in an absolute culture war with fans of Godzilla movies that aren't from the Monsterverse. It's simply incredible to watch the same group of people shame -1 and Shin Godzilla fans all across the internet, while gatekeeping the absolute worst version of this character since Matthew Broderick stormed Madison Square Garden. So yeah, I'm not here to redeclare the series as a failure. It's not the mortician's job to declare a body dead. That's the first paramedic's job on the scene. If you wanted a series of bad movies, I guess congrats, Monster Bros. You got what you always wished for. I'm just glad that a movie like -1 came out to drag all of your insecurities into the light. The fact that somebody took the idea of Godzilla and made it into something narratively rich, emotionally resonant, terrifying, and awe-inspiring, in the same year that this 80s music video cop comedy of a kaiju movie comes out, well, that's all the proof I need on how these movies can be more than just mindless sludge. I'm asking that you fight the American stereotype, fight the urge to stare at CGI and call it high art. After all, within about 5 to 10 years from now, AI will be so advanced that you can queue up monster fights all day long. In 10 years, you'll be able to type Mechagodzilla vs. Gamera 4K into an AI app, and an entire 2-hour movie will pop up. Maybe then, people will realize that what makes a movie truly more than a product are the characters, the emotions, the ideas behind it. You'll always be able to see CGI monster fights, Monster Bros, don't worry. You'll always be able to rewatch YouTube clips from this dumb movie and that several that came before it. But what will you want out of your favorite movie monster once his battles can be programmed in the flash of an eye? Maybe then, Monster Bros will realize that a good movie can still include the things they love about these movies, while offering up great writing, memorable characters, and other elements that make up an actually enjoyable film, no matter the tone, genre, or audience. Until then, enjoy your specifically catered sludge, folks. Sure, it's better than no Godzilla at all, but we can do better. And I have a feeling that a lot of you spend a lot of your time saying that Hollywood can do better in other categories, but when it comes to this, just the blinders are on. Until you're ready to see again, I'm DS Lyons of the Movie Blues, and I'm done with this franchise on this channel. Bye!
Because I love you, and I love you, and I love you, and I've seen all your movies, and I love your movies, and I think you're the best.